We are heretics because we choose our faith, not because we want to be contrary or rebellious, although we do sometimes enjoy that. During the first 3 centuries of the Christian Church, prior to the Nicene Creed and the doctrine of the Trinity, there were diverse beliefs about the nature of God and Jesus. Among these was a belief that Jesus was sent from God on a divine mission. Another religious choice in the first 3 centuries of the Common Era was that of universal salvation. Liberal religion is not a new phenomenon, but it is much safer to be a heretic today than it was back then. Universalism is traced back to Origen over 1800 years ago, who taught that the scriptures were not meant to be taken literally. His mystic view of universal salvation was denounced as heresy, and he was tortured, and he ultimately died in prison. The Unitarians believe in, at most, one God, and the Universalists believe that we will all ultimately be reconciled with that one God. But both religions rejected the notion of predestination and saw Jesus as something other than God. They were excommunicated, they were imprisoned, burned at the stake, or thrown into prison or exile. Unitarian Jack Mendelson said, "Tragedy and death stalked those who first laid the foundations in Europe that was to bear the Unitarian and the Universalist names." In 1553, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake by Calvin. Servetus was a Spanish Catholic who had become a geographer and an editor in Paris, and then a physician in southern France. In that year, he published a book, The Restitution of Christianity, in which he repeated assertions that he had made in his earlier writings that the doctrines of the Trinity and infant baptism made no sense. The order for his arrest went out, and one Sunday morning, he was arrested with a speedy trial for spreading heresy, and he was executed. He was burned at the stake with his copy of the Restitution strapped to his thigh. In 1647, the Assembly of Divines at Westminster in London, England, ordered John Biddle's twofold catechism to be burned by the common hangman, signifying that its publication itself was a criminal offense. It was ordered the Committee of Plundered Ministers to examine Biddle. Biddle was a thorough Unitarian and a biblical scholar, considered to be the father of English Unitarianism. His book offended mainline Christians who found that Unitarian ideas were blasphemous and treasonous. Biddle was placed on house arrest for 5 years, and then he went to work on his next work, 12 Arguments Against the Deity of the Holy Spirit by John Biddle. That was burned in the Westminster Square. In spite of that, a second edition had to be printed before the end of the year. He continued writing controversial works and meeting with his fellow religious followers. On October 5th, 1655, having determined that John Biddle was so controversial that any court decision on his case would endanger the Puritan government, Oliver Cromwell, the Protector of England, the Lord Protector of England, exiled and imprisoned him on the Scilly Islands. His followers started a ceaseless agitation for his release, and he was freed. In 1660, Charles II ordered a ban on all nonconformist worship, and even though Biddle held meetings in private, he was arrested and sent to jail again. 2 days after his release from jail, in September 1662, he died of an illness that he contracted in jail. Many others were persecuted, sacrificed their lives for our religious freedom. Transylvanian Unitarian Francis David died in prison as a martyr. He is famous for having to say, "We do not need to think alike to love alike." Joseph Priestley, the scientist who discovered oxygen, fled England from an angry mob who burned his library, his laboratory, and his home. John Murray was ejected from his Methodist church as he embraced Universalism and eventually left England to become the father of Universalism in America. The Unitarian controversy in the 19th century waged for over 2 decades as the liberal Congregationalists parted ways and the Unitarian Association of America was formed in 1825. We can thank William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Theodore Parker, and others for their courage and their wisdom to move us in the direction of honest religion, away from doctrine, creed, and dogma. I love the way the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Strong articulates this shift. She is a lifelong universalist. She wrote, "We have responded to an angry God with a loving God. We have asserted that God is one. We have affirmed Jesus as a teacher and a prophet of God. We have affirmed the worthiness of humankind, of truths unknown and to be known, and that all religions have some truth, but no one religion has all the truth. We have moved with an evolving culture and increased knowledge with reason, faith, hope, and tolerance, love, and freedom. Ours is a heretical faith. Ours is a free faith, and the ground on which we stand is made holy by our forebears." Unitarian Universalist minister Richard Gilbert, the author of The Prophetic Imperative, asked that question that I asked 2 weeks ago: do we merit the wind we inherit? UUs are a beacon of liberal religious values for our communities. Our Unitarian Universalist principles and values challenge us to practice radical hospitality, welcoming all souls into our midst. Last Tuesday night, I was invited to speak at the Pride service with other interfaith colleagues. I was a little concerned about the heretical nature of what I had to say. And so as we met prior in the choir room before making our procession out into the service, I spoke to my colleagues and I said, "Do you think this will be all right?" I had a story of 2 penguins, Roy and Silo. It's a true story. And they were 2 male penguins in the New York City Zoo that fell in love. And they raised an egg thanks to the zookeeper who helped them. They made a nest. They raised an egg. The book had been banned year after year, probably about 7 years in a row now it's been banned. Last week was Banned Book Week. You're invited to read banned books. So I actually read that story to them. And I also spoke about family values. But what I discovered while I was there was that they are holy heretics as well. Marshall, I can't think of his last name. He said that, Nashville and Memphis are liberal, and we think of them, we turn to them for all of being the leaders in our movement. And yet, Chattanooga, per capita, has more welcoming churches than in any other city in Tennessee. And I think that's something to be proud of. So we don't have to do this alone. We have inherited the problem of prejudice and persecution. At times we're marginalized because of who we are. People don't understand who we are as Unitarian Universalists. One of the answers that our good friend Garrison Keeler gives us is Unitarian Universalism, where all your answers are questioned. But the one I love the most is, what is a Unitarian Universalist? Someone who believes in life before death. That's pretty good. But seriously, Dr. Davidson Lore offers us some things that we can say when people ask us that question: what do you liberal Unitarian Universalists really believe in? Sometimes we don't know how to say what we believe. He says you can say we know that we are a part of life, and that we owe something back to the world for that gift of life. We know that we are supposed to live in such a way that when we look back on it, we can be proud and make those that we care about proud. We know that we are to try and make this world a little better because we pass through it. We believe that truth, justice, and compassion are required of us. We believe that love is better than hatred, understanding is better than prejudice, and peace is better than war. We believe that if there is ever to be a better world, you and I and those whose beliefs differ from ours will have to help each other build it. Davidson states that this level of deep commonality that liberal religion is supposed to seek, articulate, and incorporate is our imperative. Without this foundation, we are simply not engaging in liberal religion, not protecting it or passing on the soul of honest religion for all which all the great religions have lived and died. Dr. Fred Wooten is the minister at the Fountain Street Church in Grand Rapids, which used to be a big Baptist church, and it's now an independent liberal church. They have always had Unitarian ministers. He says that the purpose of a liberal church is to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. These are the important tasks of the liberal religious community, and they aren't easy. They require commitment, work, and risk. Cultivating a whole and fulfilling life can be likened to gardening. The purpose of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. Davidson says that in the summary of all our readings of sacred scriptures, they must be guided by two considerations. We are seeking with honest minds and pure hearts for those things that are both useful to us and worthy of God. If we keep these things in mind, we will not be misled. Useful to us and worthy of God. What does he mean by the word God? I know Davidson lore, and he is never identified as a theist. He is more of a Buddhist. But he suggests that if you're uncomfortable with the word God, that you use the word life or love. Don't let the word get in the way of the message. I was on a year-long internship in Austin, Texas with Dr. Davidson lore, and he taught me the importance of being able to speak what I believe in ordinary language. You must speak of it in ordinary language. Otherwise, he said to me, you don't know what you're talking about if you have to resort to religious language. We must try to create noble humans from the raw material that we are born with. Material that can be good, it can be deep, it can be shallow, it can be a blessing and a curse, depending on how seriously we take the challenge of reaching our fullest human potential and becoming a healthy presence in the world. Our job is to make a positive difference for ourselves, our families, and friends. This word God can be easily translated in all the world religions. It is trying to realize our Buddha nature, trying to grow the God seed within us, trying to find and become a part of the Tao, the way. It is taking seriously the Hindu teaching that our Atman, the soul, is most essentially part of Brahman, the creative and sustaining forces of the universe. Ordinary language is the language of honest religion. I often wondered what would happen if Unitarian Universalists stopped using religious language to label ourselves. The words that we use, theist, atheist, agnostic, deist, Christian, Buddhist, Jew. What if we just stopped using those labels and began to speak to one another in ordinary language to express what it is we believe? As a liberal religious community, we need to recognize the necessity of creating sacred time and sacred place where we can learn to be, to become more fully human, to clarify our priorities and convey our holiness to our lives. This is why we need a church home. What makes it worth it for busy families to add yet another activity to their already stress-filled lives? Why bother bringing their children to church? To give our children a grounded center and the gift of a free faith is the answer. We're moving at a much faster pace these days than we were when I was a child. Every day seems crammed with activities. Some days when I was a child, I would go to Grove Field and fly a kite all by myself. We no longer feel safe giving that kind of freedom to our children. It's a different world that we live in. Now more than ever, we need to create that sacred space and a nurturing environment for our children. Now more than ever, we need to provide religious education that fosters religious identity and a sense of belonging. I love the story from Anne Lamott from her book, Traveling Mercies. She was a born-again Christian, and she's an author, and she's very funny. She has a wonderful way of speaking of the holy in ordinary terms. She's earthy, irreverent, and heretical. She writes, she tells the story of her church. She said, after several pastors over the years, a tall African-American woman named Veronica came to be the minister of St. Andrew's Church. She has huge, gentle doctor hands with dimples where the knuckles should be like baby fists. She stepped into us, the wonderful old worn pair of pants that is St. Andrew, and they fit. She sings to us sometimes from the pulpit and tells us stories of when she was a child. When Veronica was 7 years old, her best friend got lost. The little girl ran up and down the streets of the big town where they lived, and she couldn't find a single landmark. Finally, a policeman stopped her and put her in his car, and he drove her around, hoping that she would find a familiar sight. Suddenly, she stopped the policeman and she said, you can stop here. This is my church. I know how to find my way home now. And this is what our liberal church has to offer: a grounded center, an honest religion, a free faith with an air of nourishment and a spiritual home to come to. And this is the gift I believe we share with the world. It's about becoming who we say we are. David Bumbaugh, the Unitarian Universalist professor and humanist at Meadville Lombard School, teaches his students that a sermon is not finished when the last word has been put down on the paper. Neither is it complete when the last sentence has been spoken. It is not complete until the listeners decide what to do with it. He writes that, unfortunately, ultimately, the significance of any sermon rests in the minds of the congregation, and over time, often over a long period, they will work with the sermon and they will complete it. Only then will the preacher really know what it was about. Laurel Hallman says that we live more deeply than we think. And she thinks that the word God has become the victim of misplaced concreteness from Whitehead. Words lose their rich metaphorical meaning. And she says that the word God could die, but that we could restore our religious imagination through poetry. And she demonstrates that through one poem by Philip Booth. It associates deep realities beyond itself and across the generations of human experience. It's called First Lesson. I invite you to sit back and listen to this profound poem. Lie back, daughter. Let your head be tipped back in the cup of my hand. Gently, and I will hold you. Spread your arms wide. Lie out on the stream and look high at the gulls. A dead man's float is face down. You will dive and swim soon enough where the tide water ebbs to the sea. Daughter, believe me, when you tire on the long thrash to your island, lie up and survive. As you float now where I held you and let go, remember what I told you. Lie gently and wide to the light year stars. Lie back, and the sea will hold you. We have been proud of our heretical faith. For too many decades, we have been defined by what we don't believe in. David Bumbaugh warns that the world is far too dangerous a place to be left in the hands of fanatics, religious or secular. We have an obligation to engage in the conversation and offer our truths in the marketplace of ideas and values. We are children of, expressions of a universe that is not only stranger than we know, but stranger than we can know. We must offer a powerful religious vision conveyed in a language of reverence that is appropriate to our tradition, our faith. Embracing freedom is not an excuse for not exercising institutional effectiveness and responsibility. Walter Hertz says that we are individual overachievers and institutional underachievers. It is not enough to declare to others what we don't believe. It is time to engage in healing conversation. So these words have been spoken. But this sermon isn't over. It's not finished until all of you decide what to do with it. What is the poetry that expresses your deepest experience? What does your version of holy heresy look like? What in life moves you? What really moves you? Philosopher and theologian Howard Thurman said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." This is what I hope for myself, to come alive. And this is what I hope for all of you, to come alive and to find your way home. May it be so.